Hi everyone, we are very excited to show you that we are going to develop in the next few lessons. So in this app you will be learning about how to break a large screen into smaller UI parts. You call it as multi-pane layouts. You'll be learning about creating fragments, adding a fragment to activity using XML. Then you'll be learning fragment event handling, adding a fragment to activity at runtime, and replacing one fragment with the other. So when you run, you will see it's one app you are developing, but when it runs on a smaller device with a smaller screen, it loads only one fragment first. Then you have to click the button to load the other one because it's a smaller screen. But the same app, when you run on a larger device, you will learn how you can display multi-panes so that you don't have to click the button like you click on the a smaller device. Here it just displays both of them at once. So it's very important for you to know how to do this using just one code base and how to develop apps so that it can utilize multi-panes on let's say larger screens. But it's very important that you look at till the end of the lesson and then the next couple of lectures in this series until we complete this app, right? We are very excited to show you how to develop this app. Okay, let's do it now. Hi everyone, welcome to the lesson Android Fragments Part 3, Build a Flexible User Interface. We'll be using these tools and developer docs as references. It's important for you to cover this prerequisite Fragments Part 2, create a fragment before this lesson. Otherwise you will not understand this lesson. Have a look at that in the description for the link. In this session you will be learning about adding a fragment to activity at runtime and replace one fragment with another. As usual, it's going to be practical demonstrations. Okay, so in the previous lesson we discussed up to this point where we got a layout large which is catering for larger screens and a normal layout for smaller screens. And if you remember the previous lesson, that was this news articles which is our main activity layout file. So we got a large version of it which we have two fragments, and in the standard version we got only one fragment. So have a look at the previous lesson if you haven't done before this lesson. So now we will move from this point onwards. So in the developer docs, the next part is building a flexible UI. So in the flexible UI, it's talking about this same scenario where you know how to display fragment A and B in larger screens and how to display this in smaller screens as well, right? So it says, for example, on a handset device, it might be appropriate to display just one fragment at a time in a smaller device. But you may set fragments side by side in a tablet which has a wider screen. So the Fragment Manager, there's a class called Fragment Manager, provides methods to add, remove, replace fragments to an activity at runtime. So we will be using Fragment Manager further in this exercise for this purpose. So to add a fragment to activity at runtime, right? So rather than defining fragments for an activity in the layout file, right? So because what we have done is we have declared the fragments in the layout files, right? But that is not dynamic, it's fixed. So rather than doing it that way, we can add fragments during runtime, right? This is necessary if you plan to change fragments during the life of activity. So this runtime nature is very important. So to perform transactions such as adding and removing fragments, you have to have Fragment Manager to create a fragment transaction. So we have to create a fragment transaction. So we got standard methods. If your activity allows fragments to be removed and replaced, you should add initial fragments to the activity during on create. So every activity has on create. So initial active fragments should be added in the on create. An important rule when dealing with fragments, especially when adding fragments at runtime, is that your activity layout must include a container view in which you can insert fragments. If you want to do this dynamic nature, you have to make sure that in your activities layout file you have a container view to insert fragments. So what is a container view? Example is frame layout. So you have to make sure you have a container view such as frame layout in the layout file of the activity if you want to dynamically add and remove uh, fragments. So the following layout is an alternative for the previous session. So we saw the previous session layout news articles.xml, which is, see, news articles, the normal one, not the large one, the normal one. In the normal one we got a fragment, but now in this we are going to use frame layout, which is a container view, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this right into the normal one, not to the large one. Large one we have already taken care of it. So in the smaller one I'm going to put this code in the smaller XML, right? So that means I'm not putting a linear layout or anything like that. Instead of that I'm putting a frame layout, and I have ID because I will have to refer this frame layout dynamically. Okay, and then inside your activity you will call these methods: get support fragment manager to get a fragment manager, and begin transaction, etc. So in your main activity, so if I go to the main activity, at the moment I have only this, but now we are going to dynamically add fragments. So inside on create you refer to the news articles, but this time what happens is when you are running it on a normal device, it has a frame layout. So it's a layout, and now it's a empty, meaning frame layout has no components. So now you have to make sure that you put the first fragment into this. That you do from inside the activity, right? From here you will be doing it. So first of all you have to check whether you have the fragment container. What is this fragment container? That is what you declared in the smaller XML ID, fragment container. So you have to check whether it's running in the smaller screen. So if it's running on a smaller screen, it's running this XML and it will have the fragment container. But if the app is running on a larger screen, it does not have that. It has two fragments. It does not have the fragment container. The fragment container is found only when it in the smaller XML, meaning when you run on a smaller device. So you check it dynamically with the if condition. You are checking whether you have the fragment container. This means at runtime you are checking whether this is running in a smaller screen, because if it's running on a smaller screen, as I said now, for smaller screens only it will execute this XML which has the fragment container. For larger screens it executes this XML and it does not have that fragment container here. It has here. So that's what you are checking at runtime over here, right? So if that fragment container is there, right, and it's checking whether you are restoring, so don't worry a lot about that for now. Then, right, you create the headlines fragment, the first one, right, the headlines fragment, this one, right, okay, which is this one, the first one, the yellow color one, if you remember, this one. So you create an object of that, and for that you put some arguments, right, in this, and then it gets the fragment manager, then begin transaction, then to that it adds to the fragment container. That means to this fragment container, to this frame layout, to this position, it's adding the first fragment, which is the headlines fragment. So this is how you dynamically add it. So I'm going to put this code now, right? I'm going to put this code, copy it, right? And let's go and put it. Now let's do one small experiment before we put that. At the moment it has a frame layout in the smaller device. So now let's run this. Before we copy and paste that, let's run this as it is. So let's run this, stop this. Let's run this on Pixel Excel. Let's stop and run on the smaller device. Let's see what's happening when you run on a smaller device. So when you run on the smaller device, right, what's happening? Let's see what. Now I run it and I don't see. Why? I don't see anything because it's just an empty frame layout. But if I run this on a larger screen, the tablet, if I run it on the tablet, I will see it. Why? On the tablet, it will automatically at runtime use the large XML, this one, which has the two fragments. But for smaller devices, it's using this normal XML, which has a frame layout, which has nothing. That is why you don't see anything. Now, that is what I said. You have to check whether it is running with the fragment container, and then you embed the headlines fragment. You are adding it to that fragment container. So you do it using these few lines. So you have to put these few lines into the main activity. So you dynamically check, right, whether it's running with the fragment container, and if so, it creates a headline fragment of your fragment class, the headline fragment, which is this one, and it got the class, the headline fragment, this one. So it creates it, and then it's pass some param arguments. Then important line is this one, get support fragment manager. Then it begins a transaction, adds the first fragment, which is your headline fragment, this one, to the fragment container, right, to that fragment container, meaning to this frame layout, this one, to this empty position, right, you will be adding, and you commit. That's standard way of finishing it. Let's run this now on the Pixel Excel, right, API 30, which earlier we did not see anything. Let's see what's happening. See, now it's working because it's dynamically loading the fragment. So now just now you learn how to dynamically load fragments into a activity. And if you don't do this, once again I will show you. If I cut this, when you run this now, you will see an empty activity, because in the activity XML, it has an empty frame layout. You have to put something to the frame layouts. So that is what we do here. Dynamically we are checking. We are putting to the frame layout here, but we are checking whether we are running it with the fragment container, meaning we are running it with this. Now what happens in a larger screen is, when you run this code on a larger device, there will be no fragment container. Why? Because on the large XML, there's no fragment container. What you have is just fragments. Awesome, right? So that is how you dynamically load fragments at runtime. And then what you want to do is, you want to replace one fragment with the other, right? So for that you can use the replace method, right? And then you have to put this code here. So for that, let's do it this way. Now okay, so on the news articles.xml, right, on the news articles, we are at runtime, we are loading the news fragment headline. Then I got a button. Let's on click event, let's say let's put a method name now. Let's call a method here, right? So I'm just calling on click load news item one method on the button click of the on the button click. Now this button is in the fragment, but keep in mind, when you are writing code for a button which is inside a fragment, there are two places to write this code. One place is inside the fragment class. What is this fragment class? This is the headline fragment. So one option is to write it here. The other option is to write it in the activity. Let's start by putting it into the fragment. So because I have the button here, now I put on click. So this is headline fragment. So let's go and put the headline fragment and see whether this works. So as you all know, this is how you write a button click method. So this is a standard syntax. This is standard syntax. So let's put a system out and see whether this click works, right? So load news item one, let's put some stars. So if the button click working, it should print this on the console. So let's see whether it works. So now let me click on the button. So when I click on the button, it crashed. It's going to the previous app because the app crashed. Why did it crash? Let's look at the console. So you have to click the run and expand this a little bit, and it says could not find method load news item 1. So it says it can't find this method when I click the button. So when I click the button, it says it can't find this method, right? Why is it? Well, that is the standard behavior. The standard behavior is, even if you have say a button, okay, you got a button in a fragment, and if you're writing the on click event for a button, right, if you write it in the fragment, it won't work. Well, you can write it in the fragment. In that case, you have to first of all implement an interface in the fragment call on and override on click method, and inside that you have to figure out which button was clicked. We will do it in a little while, right? So that is one, that is one possibility. The other possibility is you can straight away write it in the activity which loaded the fragment. For example, the main activity is the one which is loaded in the fragment. So if you put this, right, if you put this click method, cut from here and put to the main activity, if you go to the bottom and put it here, right, the main activity, give me a sec. Yeah, so I have to be careful, right? So I have to put it outside that method, just over here, right? So you put it here in the main activity, and let's run this now, right? So if I run this now while putting that method in the main activity, and let's keep this also here, let's click this, see, it works. Look at the console, right? Look at the console. On the console it works, so it outputs. So now you understood, when you are writing the button click event for a button which is inside a fragment, if you write it inside the fragment it won't work, but if you write it on the activity it works. But if you want to write it in the fragment, yes, you can do that, right? Let's see how you do it now in the fragment itself if you want to write it. So what you have to do is you have to go to the relevant fragment, let's say the headline fragment, and you have to say that it implements on click listener, right? So you have to say that it implements the on click listener, right? So it's very important for you to understand. So once you implement the on click listener, you have to override the on click method in that listener. So then you have to override, right, the on click, you have to override the on click method, right? So you have to override the on click method. So in the on click method, right, let's see what's happening now. And then what you have to do is you have to refer to this inflator. So this inflator.inflate, it basically gives a view. So you will have to store this in a view. If you are doing it like this, let's say a view object, right? And using this view, you will have to say view dot find view by ID. Then you have to refer to that button which is inside the fragment headlines. So if you go to the fragment headlines, you got this button, right? So you have to give ID for this button. Let's say BTN read news item 1. Let's call it as BTN read news item 1, right? So let's say yes. So then what you do is from the fragment you will now refer to that button. You will say r dot id dot btn read news item 1. Then you will have to store it on a button reference, right? Say b1, and onto this you have to call on the button you have to call a method now. So now to this button you have to say set on click listener. Set on click listener, this. Why do I say this? Because I have my on click method here. So this is how you dynamically attach it to this on click, and then you have to make sure that you return this view from because the on create view should return a view. So this is how you dynamically do it. If you want to write it inside, if you want to write the click event inside the fragment, then what you do is in the fragment headline you don't call this method. In the on click you don't call it, right? Because if you put it here you have to write it in the activity. Now I wrote it inside the fragment, so now I can go to the activity and I can just comment this because I don't want it. So up to you. If you want to write it inside the activity, you don't have to do anything. You just put it, you just put the on click, and then you just write it inside the activity. But if you want to write the code inside the fragment, then you have to do, what you have to do is you have to go to the fragment, implement on click listener, then you have to override the on click method, and then you have to do this code and add the on click listener to the button. So if I run this now, right, if I run this now and if I click the button, right, if I click, see it works on click, right, it's working now on click. And if I got multiple buttons, I have to just put a simple if condition here to figure out which button has been clicked. So to see which button has been clicked, I will have to put a if condition, and let's say view dot this view parameter dot get id, right? So if that id is equal to, let's say, r dot id dot btn news item 1, so this way I will know whether it's button, whether it's the button 1 has which has been clicked. Because if there are multiple buttons, yes, there are multiple buttons, see, so all the buttons will say, so if this is btn, let's say if this is let's put a name here, let's say if this is btn read news item 2 for example, then if I'm writing the code for that, I will have to do the same thing, isn't it, right? So I will have to refer it from here like this, right? So this time it's going to be b2, this time it's going to be btn read news items 2. But for b2 also you will have to say set on click listener this. So that means if you have multiple buttons, everyone will refer to the same on click listener. That is why you need this if condition here to figure out which button has been clicked. So if this is btn news item 2, then you do whatever it is, right? Okay, awesome. So now when you click on the button, right, so now when you click on the button, you, let's say you want to load the, so let's run this now. So let's say when you click on the button, you want to load the next fragment, right? So when you click on this, you want to load the next fragment. So the code to load the next fragment is here, right? So the code to load the next fragment is just here. So if we go into the coding, so this is how you dynamically load the second fragment. So I'm copying the code from the developer docs. Let's put it here, right? So I just put it and I will have to correct the problem. So what are the problems? So first of all, you create the article fragment, the second fragment. So from the headline you create the article fragment, then there's a bundle, it's putting some data, right? Article fragment dot position. So at the moment I will just comment these lines, right? So I will just comment these lines, right? We can just that. Then the fragment transaction, right? So I will have to import the package. So if I click the mouse and press alt plus enter as it says, it should import the class, right? Now the fragment transaction comes from the activity, right? So I might have to do a small thing here, especially here the get support fragment manager. So there's a small code change I have to do here. to get access to this, I will have to say get activity, because I have to first get the parent activity. I'm inside the fragment dot get support manager, right? So make sure you have to put this extra code here, because this method comes from the activity. So you have to first get access to the parent activity and then call this method. And once again, okay, so fragment transaction, alter enter, right? Alter enter, then that error goes off, right? So this is how you dynamically load the fragment. So what you do is you create an object of the fragment, and if you need to pass any data into the fragment, you put it into the bundle, and then you get the activity, parent activity, and from that you get the support fragment manager, and you begin the transaction. Then on the fragment transaction, you call the replace method to put the new fragment into the fragment container. So the fragment container is in your original layout XML. You have the activities layout, you have the fragment container. So then you, on that you add, then also you add it to the backstack, because then even if you go forward, you can come back, right, by clicking the back button, and then you will say transaction commit. Let's see whether this works. So now if you run, you will see that if you click this button, well, it won't work, because I got the if condition and I wrote it for the first button. So if I click on the first button, it works, and I can click the back button and come back, right? Awesome. So if I comment this add to backstack, and if I run this now after commenting it, you will not be able to come back. That's why it is important to add to the backstack. So now if I click this and click the back button, it won't go to that. It's going to the other app, whatever you had it on the screen before it. So if you want to click back and go to the previous screen, you have to make sure that you add this to the add it to the backstack, the current transaction. So if you run this now by adding to the backstack, you can click and come back. So this is how you handle fragments. This is how you dynamically load a fragment at runtime. Now if I run this on the tablet, right, so if I run this on the tablet, if I click on the button, now it works on the phone, as you can see it works, right? But on the tablet, if I click on the tablet, the button, I'm getting a runtime error, right? And the app closes, and what I see is my previous apps, because my current app crashed. Why did my current app crash? That is because when I click on the button, right, when I click on the button, right, uh, if it's the button one, I am checking, I'm basically I'm creating the article fragment, and I'm getting the fragment transaction, I'm putting it, I'm replacing it on the fragment container. But on a larger screen, I don't have the fragment container, as I explained. Why? The fragment container was declared here, right? It was declared here. It's not in the large version of that layout file. There's no fragment container. So if I click the button on the larger device, it will crash. So the question is, how do you solve this? How do you solve this problem? We will show you in our next lesson. So in the next video, we will show you how to tackle this situation, right? But in this video, now you understood how do you dynamically load fragments, how do you dynamically deal with fragments. That's what you learned here so far. So I will show you a temporary solution to avoid this app crashing. That is, if you remember in the main activity, even in the main activity, when you before you load the headlines fragment, you checked whether it has a fragment container. So the same command you can put it inside the headlines fragment also, and see whether the fragment container is there. So in the headline fragment, in the button click, without just directly loading the second fragment, you can put that if condition here. But remember, the find view by id is a method of the activity. Now you are in the fragment. So first of all, before you call this method, you have to say get activity. That means you are telling the fragment to get its activity. Then put a dot and then you can call find view by id and you are checking whether that fragment content is there. If it's not null, then only you will load the second fragment into the fragment container if it's there only. So this way, if you run now, it will not crash in the tablet. Only thing, it will not load it because there's no need of loading it. It's already loaded, right? Because it's a larger screen. But on the phone, when you click, you want it to get loaded. So as you can see, now it works on the phone, and you don't have to, because on the fragment, it's in the larger device, it's already loaded. Awesome. So we successfully completed the practical demonstration, and you learn a few important things here. You learn about adding a fragment to an activity at runtime dynamically, and especially we use these methods. And also you learn about replacing one fragment with the other, right? So you can find the link to download the source code for you to practice it further. We use these references in this lecture, and we are very excited to see you in the next lesson. So make sure to look at the next part to complete this topic, to solve the remaining things of what we said we will be doing, right? And have a look at our other videos. So we are very excited to see you in our next video to complete this app. See you in our next video.